The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Harold Thompson slowly made his way down the sidewalk. At 90 years old, his steps were careful and measured, his weathered hands gripping a simple wooden cane that had been his companion for the past 5 years. The purple heart medal tucked safely in his jacket pocket seemed heavier today, a reminder of battles fought long ago in fields far from this quiet neighborhood. Harold had lived on Maple Street for over 40 years, watching families come and go, children grow up and move away. Today, like every Tuesday, he was making his weekly trip to the corner grocery store. It was a routine that kept him connected to the world, a small adventure that made him feel useful and independent despite his daughter's constant worry. The Bullied neighborhood had changed over the years. What once was a street filled with families barbecuing in their backyards and children playing hopscotch on the sidewalks had slowly transformed. New faces appeared regularly, and not all of them were friendly. Harold had noticed the group of young men who gathered near the abandoned lot at the end of the street. They wore similar clothes, spoke in hushed tones, and seemed to watch everything that happened in the neighborhood with calculating eyes. As Harold approached the intersection where he would turn toward the store, he noticed 3 of these young men standing near the bus stop. They were in their early 20s, dressed in baggy clothes with bandanas hanging from their back pockets. The one in the center, who appeared to be their leader, had numerous tattoos covering his arms and neck. His name was Marcus, though Harold didn't know this. What Harold did know was that these young men had been causing trouble in the neighborhood for months. Marcus spotted the elderly man approaching and nudged his companions. There was something about seeing someone so vulnerable that brought out the worst in him. Perhaps it was the frustration of his own difficult life. Or maybe it was simply the thrill of having power over someone weaker. Whatever the reason, Marcus stepped directly into Harold's path, blocking his way forward. The old veteran looked up, his pale blue eyes meeting Marcus's dark stare. Harold had faced down enemy soldiers in Korea, had seen things that would haunt a person for life, but he had never been one to back down from a challenge. However, at 90, his options were limited. He simply wanted to get his groceries and return home to the small apartment where he lived alone, surrounded by photographs of his late wife and memories of better times. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He could see that this old man was alone and defenseless, the perfect target for the kind of intimidation that made him feel powerful in a world where he controlled very little. The other 2 gang members flanked Harold, creating a triangle that trapped the elderly veteran against a chain-link fence. The confrontation was about to begin, and Harold Thompson, who had survived war and decades of life's challenges, found himself facing a different kind of battle on the street he had called home for so long. The afternoon was about to take a turn that none of them could have predicted, setting in motion events that would change everything for everyone involved. Marcus stepped closer to Harold, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Hey, old man, you look a little lost. Maybe you shouldn't be walking around here all by yourself. This isn't exactly the safest neighborhood for someone like you." His companions laughed, enjoying the show their leader was putting on. Harold straightened his shoulders as much as his aged spine would allow. He had dealt with bullies before, though it had been many decades since he'd faced one. "I've been walking these streets since before you were born, son. I think I can manage just fine." His voice was steady, though his heart was beating faster than it had in years. The gang leader's expression hardened at being called son by this old man. Marcus had grown up without a father, raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Respect was something he demanded, not something he felt he had ever been given freely. "Listen here, Grandpa. You don't know who you're talking to. This is our street now, and maybe it's time you learned to show some respect." One of Marcus's friends, a thin young man named Rico, pulled out his phone and started recording. This was the kind of content that got shared in their circle, proof of their dominance over their territory. The third member of their group, a heavy-set teenager called Tank, cracked his knuckles loudly, the sound echoing off the nearby buildings. Harold could feel the situation escalating, but he refused to show fear. During the Korean War, he had been captured by enemy forces and held for 3 weeks. They had tried to break him then, and he had survived through sheer willpower and the knowledge that giving up would dishonor everyone who depended on him. The same stubborn pride that had gotten him through that ordeal was surfacing now. "I fought for this country when you were nothing but a dream," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I've earned the right to walk anywhere. I please without asking permission from punks who think intimidating old people makes them tough." Marcus felt his anger spike. This old man was supposed to be scared, supposed to beg or cry or at least back down. Instead, he was standing there, acting like he was better than them. "You think being old gives you some kind of special treatment? You think we care about whatever war stories you got rattling around in that ancient brain of yours?" The gang leader reached out and grabbed Harold's cane, yanking it away from him. Without his support, the elderly veteran stumbled, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the fence. The metal links bit into his palm and he could feel his balance wavering dangerously. "Please," Harold said, not begging but simply asking. "I just want to go to the store. I'm not looking for trouble with anyone." But Marcus was beyond listening now. The power he felt over this helpless old man was intoxicating. He raised the cane above his head, as if he might strike Harold with his own walking stick. Rico continued filming, excited by the drama unfolding in front of his camera. Tank moved closer, ready to grab the old man if he tried to run. Harold closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his late wife Margaret and wondering if this was really how his story would end. He thought of his grandson Michael, who had called just last week to check on him. Michael would be devastated to hear that his grandfather had been hurt by street thugs just a few blocks from his own home. The confrontation had reached its peak, with 3 young gang members surrounding one defenseless, elderly veteran. But sometimes, just when things seem darkest, fate has a way of intervening in the most unexpected ways. The sound of a car door slamming cut through the tense afternoon air like a gunshot. Marcus paused, still holding Harold's cane above his head, and turned to see who had interrupted their fun. A tall figure was walking quickly across the street, his stride purposeful and confident. Even from a distance, there was something about the way this man moved that commanded attention. As the figure got closer, details became clear. He was a young man in his late 20s, well-built and wearing a crisp uniform that immediately caught the light. The badge on his chest gleamed silver, and his utility belt held all the tools of law enforcement. This was clearly a police officer, and he was heading straight toward them. Rico quickly shoved his phone into his pocket, the recording forgotten in the face of potential legal trouble. Tank took a step back, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Even Marcus felt his confidence waver as the officer approached, though he tried to maintain his tough facade. The police officer's eyes swept the scene, taking in every detail with the trained observation skills of someone who had dealt with countless street confrontations. He saw the elderly man pressed against the fence, the 3 gang members surrounding him, and the walking cane being held like a weapon. His jaw tightened as he realized what he had stumbled upon. But Harold saw something else entirely. As the officer came closer, his face became clear in the afternoon sunlight. The familiar jawline, the same blue eyes that Harold saw in the mirror every morning, the way he held his shoulders square and proud. Harold's heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned on him. "Michael?" Harold's voice was barely a whisper, filled with disbelief and relief. The police officer's steps faltered for just a moment as he heard his name, his eyes focused on the elderly man against the fence, really seeing him for the first time. The silver hair, the familiar face that had smiled at him across countless family dinners, the gentle eyes that had always looked at him with such pride and love. "Grandpa?" Officer Michael Thompson's voice carried a mixture of shock and growing anger as he realized what was happening. His grandfather, the man who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident, the veteran who had taught him about honor and courage, was being terrorized by street thugs just blocks from his own home. Marcus felt the situation shift dramatically. This wasn't just any police officer who had happened upon their little show of dominance. This was someone with a personal connection to their victim, someone who now had every reason to take this confrontation very personally indeed. Michael's hand instinctively moved to his radio, but he stopped himself. This wasn't the time for backup or procedure. This was family, and family required a more direct approach. His grandfather had always been his hero, the strongest man he had ever known. Seeing Harold pressed against a fence, clearly frightened and vulnerable, ignited something fierce and protective in Michael's chest. The three gang members suddenly found themselves facing a very different kind of opponent than they had expected. This wasn't some random cop who might write them a citation or move them along. This was a grandson who had just discovered that strangers were threatening the most important person in his life. Officer Thompson stepped forward, his presence filling the space between the gang members and his grandfather. His training had taught him to remain calm and professional in all situations, but his personal investment in this particular confrontation was about to put that training to the ultimate test. The afternoon sun seemed to shine brighter as the real confrontation was about to begin. Marcus still held the cane, but now he was facing someone who wouldn't back down, someone who had both the authority and the personal motivation to ensure that justice was served. The balance of power had shifted completely, and everyone present could feel the change in the air like electricity before a storm. Michael's voice was deadly calm when he spoke, the kind of quiet that made smart people pay very close attention. "I'm going to need you three gentlemen to step away from my grandfather. Right now." Marcus tried to recover his bravado, but there was something in the officer's eyes that made his usual tough guy routine feel suddenly inadequate. "Hey man, we weren't doing nothing, just having a conversation with the old dude here. A conversation that requires you to take his walking cane and threaten him with it." Michael's eyes never left Marcus's face. "That's a very interesting definition of conversation you have there." Harold felt strength returning to his legs as he watched his grandson take control of the situation. This was the same boy who used to sit on his lap listening to war stories, who had grown into a man dedicated to protecting others, just as Harold had once done. The pride swelling in the old veteran's chest almost overwhelmed him. Rico and Tank were already backing away, clearly wanting no part of a confrontation with law enforcement. They had been in this situation before, and knew that discretion was usually the better part of valor. But Marcus was younger and more foolish, still caught up in the need to prove himself in front of his crew. "Look, officer," Marcus said, trying to sound reasonable while still holding the cane. "This is just a neighborhood thing. Maybe you should mind your own business and keep walking." Michael took another step forward, and now he was close enough that Marcus could see the name tag on his uniform clearly. Thompson, the same last name as the old man they had been hassling. The gang leader's face went pale as the full implications hit him. "Here's the thing," Michael said conversationally as if he were discussing the weather. "That's not just any old man you're threatening. That's Harold Thompson, Korean War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and the man who raised me after my parents died. So you see, this became my business the moment you decided to mess with my family." The casual way Michael delivered this information was somehow more intimidating than if he had shouted. There was a certainty in his voice that suggested he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect his grandfather, regardless of the consequences. Marcus finally understood that he had made a serious mistake. This wasn't going to end with them walking away and bragging about scaring an old man. This was going to end with real consequences, the kind that could change the direction of their lives permanently. "Now," Michael continued, extending his hand palm up, "you're going to give me that cane. Then you're going to apologize to my grandfather for frightening him. And after that, we're going to have a discussion about what happens next." The neighborhood around them seemed to have gone quiet, as if even the birds were holding their breath to see how this confrontation would resolve. A few faces appeared in windows, neighbors who had been watching the situation unfold from the safety of their homes. Harold straightened up against the fence, feeling more secure now that Michael was there, but he also worried about his grandson. These young men were dangerous, and Harold had lived long enough to know that desperate people could do unpredictable things when they felt cornered. Marcus looked around desperately, seeking some escape from the situation that had spiraled completely out of his control. His two friends were already half a block away, having decided that loyalty only extended so far when facing potential jail time. He was alone now, holding a stolen walking cane while facing down a police officer who had every personal and professional reason to make his life very difficult. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus had to decide whether to continue his foolish bravado or accept that he had lost this particular battle completely. The choice he made in the next few seconds would determine not just the immediate outcome, but potentially the entire future direction of his life. Marcus stared at the extended hand for what felt like an eternity. The weight of the wooden cane in his grip seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Behind Officer Thompson, he could see the old man watching him with those steady blue eyes that held decades of wisdom and experience. There was no anger in Harold's gaze, only a quiet expectation that Marcus would do the right thing. Something inside the young gang member began to crack. Perhaps it was the realization that he had been picking on someone's beloved grandfather, or maybe it was the way Officer Thompson remained completely calm, despite having every reason to be furious. Whatever it was, Marcus felt his defiance crumbling like a wall built on sand. Slowly, reluctantly, he placed the cane in Michael's outstretched hand. The moment the walking stick left his fingers, Marcus felt as though he had surrendered more than just a piece of wood. He had given up the illusion that intimidating innocent people made him powerful. Michael accepted the cane without breaking eye contact, then immediately turned and handed it back to his grandfather. Harold accepted it gratefully, his fingers wrapping around the familiar worn wood that had supported him through so many walks around the neighborhood. "Thank you," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying genuine gratitude for getting his mobility aid back. Michael then turned his attention back to Marcus, who stood there looking younger and more vulnerable than he had just minutes before. "Now the apology," the officer said firmly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unused to being in a position where he had to show genuine remorse. His whole life had been about projecting strength and never backing down from anyone. But looking at Harold Thompson, really seeing him as a person rather than just a target, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Shame. "I'm sorry," Marcus mumbled, his eyes focused on the ground. "Look at him when you apologize," Michael instructed, his voice still calm but unyielding. Marcus raised his head reluctantly and met Harold's eyes. What he saw there surprised him. Instead of the satisfaction of victory or the coldness of judgment, he saw something unexpected: understanding. It was as if this old man somehow recognized the anger and frustration that had driven Marcus to this moment. "I'm sorry, sir," Marcus said again, this time with genuine feeling. "I was wrong to bother you. You were just trying to go about your business, and I had no right to stop you or take your cane." Harold studied the young man's face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, son. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them." The simplicity and grace of his grandfather's response filled Michael with even more pride. This was the man who had taught him that strength wasn't about dominating others, but about protecting those who needed protection. Harold had every right to demand that Marcus be arrested and prosecuted, but instead he was offering forgiveness and a chance at redemption. Michael pulled out his citation book, causing Marcus to tense up again. But instead of writing a ticket, the officer tore out a blank piece of paper and wrote something on it. He folded the paper and handed it to Marcus. "That's the address of a community center about 10 minutes from here," Michael explained. "They run programs for young men who want to turn their lives around. Job training, education assistance, counseling. The director's name is on there too. He's a good man who used to be in a situation similar to yours." Marcus took the paper with shaking hands, not understanding why he was being offered help instead of punishment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Michael glanced at his grandfather, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod of approval. "Because my grandfather taught me that everyone deserves a chance to become better than they are. But this is your only chance, Marcus. If I see you bothering elderly people or anyone else in this neighborhood again, things will go very differently." Gang member nodded quickly, clutching the paper like it might be a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. For the first time in years, someone was offering him a path that didn't involve violence or illegal activity. The possibility of a different future was almost too much to hope for, but the seed of that hope had been planted. 6 months later, Harold Thompson was making his usual Tuesday walk to the corner store when he noticed a familiar figure approaching from the opposite direction. The young man was wearing clean clothes and walking with purpose. But what caught Harold's attention most was the genuine smile on his face. Marcus had changed dramatically since that afternoon encounter. The anger that had once radiated from him like heat from a furnace had been replaced by something Harold recognized from his own experience. The quiet confidence that comes from having a meaningful purpose in life. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus called, out as he drew near, his voice respectful and warm. "How are you doing today, sir?" Harold stopped and leaned on his cane, genuinely pleased to see the transformation in the young man. "I'm doing well, Marcus. You look like you're doing pretty well yourself these days." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir, I am. I wanted to thank you again for what you and your grandson did for me that day. I went to that community center and it changed everything. I'm working there now, actually, helping other guys who are in the same situation I was in." The pride in Marcus's voice was unmistakable. He had discovered something that his old life of intimidation and petty crime had never given him: the satisfaction of making a positive difference in the world. "I'm also taking classes at the community college," Marcus continued, "working toward my GED first, then maybe something in social work. I want to help kids before they make the mistakes I made." Harold felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced watching his grandson grow up to become a police officer dedicated to serving his community. Here was proof that people could change, that second chances weren't always wasted, and that compassion could be more powerful than punishment. "Your grandson saved my life that day," Marcus said seriously. "Not just by stopping me from doing something really stupid, but by giving me a chance to become someone better. I think about that moment every day." What Marcus didn't mention was how that encounter had rippled through his former gang. Rico and Tank had been amazed when Marcus walked away from their lifestyle entirely, choosing programs and legal work over the easy money of street crime. 2 other members had followed his example, inspired by his transformation. Harold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small pin, the same Purple Heart medal he had carried for decades. Marcus's eyes widened as the old veteran pressed it into his palm. "This represents courage in the face of adversity," Harold said quietly. "You've shown that same courage by choosing to change your life when it would have been easier to stay the same. I think you've earned the right to carry this." Marcus stared at the medal with tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the gesture. A man he had once threatened and humiliated was now honoring him with one of his most precious possessions. The weight of that trust and forgiveness was almost too much to bear. "I can't take this, sir," Marcus whispered. "This belongs to you. You earned it in the war." Harold smiled and closed Marcus's fingers around the medal. "I earned it by facing my battles, son. Now you're facing yours. The war might be different, but courage is courage." As they parted ways that afternoon, both men felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that grace and redemption are possible even in the darkest circumstances. Harold continued toward the store, his steps perhaps a little lighter than usual. Marcus headed back to the community center, where he would spend the evening mentoring teenagers who reminded him of his former self. Officer Michael Thompson drove past on his patrol route and saw his grandfather talking to a young man he recognized. Through his windshield, he watched Marcus pocket something small and shake Harold's hand with obvious respect and gratitude. Michael smiled to himself, knowing that his grandfather had once again proven that sometimes the most powerful victories are won not through force, but through the simple act of seeing the humanity in others. The neighborhood had become safer, not because criminals had been locked away, but because one had chosen to become something better. And it all started with an old veteran who refused to let fear change his daily routine, and a police officer who learned that justice sometimes looks different than punishment. In the end, everyone involved discovered that the strongest people are often those who choose compassion over revenge and hope over hatred.